I came back in the 80s. I discovered there was a new form of media. I was also a student of Marshall McLuhan, who said the media is the message. The media is creates the realities that you trap yourself into. The words that have been printed in your word processing thing when you were a kid, ages 3 to 10. The media, the type, the way you communicate, package, and send your stuff defines realities. And if you change the media, and the whole thing's over in 5 minutes? Oh my God, okay. Well, I thought it was an hour. It's only half an hour? Oh, well, I wanted to show you. Yeah, okay. Now you better come to the workshop because we've got some really powerful stuff, and we're going to have show you how we're going to put you in a trance, and then we're going to show you how you can reprogram how our brains are being programmed now by mainline television, and how realities have been created for thousands of years by people like the Catholic Church who use stained glass, who use rose windows. Yeah, hi, this is Chris, and this is Joey, and Camilla. And, well, the session is over, but everybody's going to come now. What? No, it's 7:30. Should we show them? You want to try to show them? Should we go ahead? Yeah. All right. Just pop it in. It's ready to go. All right. There you go. Yeah. Now remember, this is a demonstration. We're going to show you how we're going to try to imprint you with some ideas. The ideas are about Socrates, about thinking for yourself, and about the power of your brain, and how you got to learn to use your eyeballs. And I've never seen this before. Traffic's fucked, isn't it? All right, lights. How can we get the lights out? The first product being advertised here is chaos. And the aim is to persuade you that chaos is the basic nature of the universe. Chaos is the state of our brain at this time. And chaos is wonderful because it allows you to dial and tune it, to redesign and reprogram. Here we go. What is this thing? Isn't there something in the front there now? Alright, you want to rewind it or? Sit back and relax. Loosen up. Yeah. Quantum physics tells us the basic nature of the universe is chaos, from galaxy to quark. The ancient Hindu gurus said reality is a play of illusion, Maya. You have to be able to loosen up, unfocus your literal mind, let your brain operate at the speed your brain prefers. RPM, revelations per minute. The brain can handle 125 million signals a second. Fine-tune, focus, redesign, chaos. Tune up the chaos. Redesign it. The religion of humanism, which started in the East, was brought to the West, was brought to the West by the Athenians. Who began to use their minds, to operate their minds, to think for themselves. Democracy, humanism was born. And the Athenians said, think for yourself, in small groups, minds linked together, learn how to communicate, learn how to communicate, package your ideas, question authority, question authority. Every organized religious and political bureaucracy discourages thinking for yourself, punishes, demonizes the brain. You are forbidden by law and by religious edict. Don't tamper with your brain. Accept the rules. Turned on brain is dangerous, psychotic, brain damage, prison. In the 1950s, a Canadian philosopher, Marshall McLuhan, outlined the techniques for operating your brain. The media you use, the words you use, the methods you use to communicate, create the realities which you inhabit. You must learn to change the medium. Change the medium. When you change the medium, you change yourself, and your society. The present time, mass media, television, mass media, programming the minds. On the average, the American people spend 7 hours a day with their eyeballs, hungry mouths of the brain, sucking up junk food, being programmed to consume, to accept. Who controls your eyeball? Programs your brain. Okay, I think that's enough for the moment. Put the lights on. I want to have enough time so we could have a discussion about this. For those of you that don't come to the workshop. Yeah. You're advised not to use heavy material or drive an automobile for a half hour. You leave this room. I've never held a job. And I'm simply unemployable. There's no tax-supported institution that would be allowed to hire me. There's no big studio. So I just have to keep going on. And I've learned one thing. Since the establishment today and the media controllers of today think I'm a pariah, I'm pushed to the frontier where I meet people like Camilla, Chris, and Joey. Where's Joey? And other, the new media which began in the 1980s, changing the screen, digitizing, is creating a new species. I don't think anyone over the age of 40 can really understand what digital thinking is. The power to change what's on the screen, to communicate at the speed of light, to hook up your screen with modems, electronic bulletin boards. Already, right now, this minute, there are 2 or 3 million people hooked up in electronic bulletin boards.
Are you working on any new software?
Yes, we are. We're working on using CD-ROM. We call it a homeware, and the idea is that you build your own home, or you can have your own home, and then every room in the home is like a menu, and you can, pictures on the wall. The kids' room has a lot of video games and like that. And my room has.
Mine here running.
It's pretty old. What do you have, IBM? Yeah.
IBM doesn't do it.
The Mind Mirror is a program I did about 10 years ago, and it's a really incredibly wonderful program. The problem is it's all words, and the words, right now I'm negotiating to have Mind Mirror put with CD graphics, so that, there are about 3,000 micro events where you're in town. What bar do you go to? Do you go to the Republic Club? And then when you get there, you have to say the words, and it can all be done now orally and with multimedia graphics and full motion video, so that you're working on. Yes?
Can we change the media? Can we democratize the media, or should we regulate the media?
I study the media very carefully. Number one, I think that factory-produced literary books, magazines, so forth, are finished. Well, not magazines. As noticed, more and more magazines are going to multimedia. The Time magazine looks like Mondo 2000 now. What I'm saying is that magazines exist to have full pages of swirling colors and so forth, and big red lips and all that, and muscles, and then a little word down there, drink Marlboro, something like that. But the idea of communicating with lettered books is a stage that was necessary to go through. Kids will be learning in first grade how to package thoughts, and we're developing a keyboard instead of ABC. Within 5 strokes of a keyboard, you can pull up the country, the place, the time, a human being, a boy, 15 years old, palm trees. It takes me about 2 minutes to say, the boy fell out of the palm tree. You don't really know what I'm typing it. Tung, 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 tung. And you can see the palm tree. You can see a 13-year-old Polynesian boy doing a double backflip into a swimming pool filled with chocolate pudding. You can simply communicate. See, Marlboro cigarettes doesn't try to persuade you to smoke or drink Marlboro by giving you text. And I'm deliberately provocative now about the fact that dyslexia is good. In the 21st century, literacy, dyslexia will be considered a quaint addiction to little letters, which reading and writing will be taught in schools the way ballet dancing is, or oil painting. It's an interesting thing, and it's probably good to become a full human being, to learn how the Paleolithic people back there in the 20th and 19th century used little words that yeah. There are print books, and I apologize for that. Retinal Logic has a 50-minute tape of our multimedia presentation, which they have 30-minute tape, and you can see them and order them on sale. We hope next time we meet here there will be a CD-ROM program. Yes?
How is this type of mild trance different from a hip?
Best friend. The Pope's loaded with that. The Pope, is the most famous cross-dresser in the world. No accident, because it's also, no, of course it's hypnosis. That's the only way of doing it. And the very same techniques. I couldn't read all of those words that were there. Good. Because we're all been forced to what we call RPM. Literacy it holds down the speed and the flexibility and the breadth and ability to deal with complex events. Okay, I'm glad we got some extra time together, and I thank you for coming, and maybe see some of you at at the lecture, after you were into a little bit of repetition of the first part of the tape. Now the title of our workshop today is How to Operate Your Brain. And this is a concept that is really quite new. I never heard of this notion of operating your brain until 2 or 3 years ago. It comes, of course, from the personal computer movement, where we learned how to operate computers. It's always been true that in the history of human history, we've always learned about how things work inside our body from the technologies that we have built dealing with energies. Oh, thank you, read my mind. Harvey probably couldn't have developed his theory of heart pumping blood around until you had the Romans building aqueducts and all that sort of thing. so that our knowledge of the brain, the metaphors that we use for the brain, have changed completely in the last 10 years. For a while, 1,000 years, people thought the brain was located in the heart or in the pineal gland or the genitals or whatever, but the brain has always been a mystery, puzzle, and indeed a taboo organ. I took my doctorate in psychology late 1950. At that time, I was considered to be the best, one of the best psychology departments in the world. The brain was hardly ever mentioned. The brain was part of neurophysiology. I remember they were saying at that time the human brain is extremely complicated. It's as complicated as the New York City telephone system. Wow. No shit. I mean, really, that's a lot of connections. Too bad I don't know my area code. We have learned more about the brain, as I say, in the last 5 years than we had in the preceding 25,000 years of our species. Well, at least we know enough about the brain to realize how staggeringly ignorant we are of this incredible network we carry behind our forehead. Kind of an inflation going on. The dollar today is 1/10 of what it was when I was in high school. The number of the neurons in the brain has been going up too. I remember we used to say 15 billion and 40 billion and now 60 billion. Now they say that the human brain has over 100 billion neurons, and each neuron, far from being a little relay telephone switch or a, we used to teach it there was a sensory, and then there was the dendrite and the axon, as though the neuron was like a relay runner passing signals back and forth. Now we realize that the average brain cell has around 10,000 connections with other nerve cells. So that's 1/1000th of the 10,000th power we're dealing with. You have to understand that we are extremely primitive people, but you can only evolve when you learn how primitive we are and how important it is to learn how to operate our brains. This concept is still anathema and be considered heretical in most of the organized religions. The notion that human beings can actually dial and tune and reprogram and reformat. Oh, God. No established church or institution, including education institutions, are ready to deal with that. So what we're going to do later on is put on the screen a video program which demonstrates how we can learn how to turn on new circuits, to turn off, exit, quit your word processing mind, get back to a place of chaotic possibilities where you can format new programs. The first part of this tape, I'm going to tell you right now what it is, because the tape is designed to program your minds, and I want to warn you ahead of time with the label on the package. The message is from the sponsor. The first sponsor of this tape is Chaos, and we're going to try to get you in a vulnerable state of hypnotic, flower-like openness where you can accept the possibility that chaos is not the ultimate thing you've got to stop, but indeed chaos is a challenge, and chaos is it's only when you're loosened up and unfocused that you can reprogram your brain. We're going to have this program is sponsored by Socrates, who laid down the first basic principle of humanism. And he said, know thyself. The aim of human life is to know yourself, which is extremely treasonous, heretical, and of course against the gods. We're going to dedicate a part of this to Marshall McLuhan, who has said, pronounced, and I think he's been proven to be probably the most influential philosopher, sage of our century. The medium is a message. The media that you use defines the reality that you inhabit. And the reason we can get along in any society is because we all accept the words, we use the same language. We hate it when someone tries to change the language. Indeed, and who controls the language, who controls the communication, obviously controls the minds, programs the minds of the people who are communicated to. We're going to have a section which describes the astonishing, awesome phenomena that in the Western world today, certainly America and many other countries, in the last 50, 60, 70 years, we have had 4 changes of media which have produced 4 different generations, which has produced really basically 4 different species uneasily inhabiting our country right now, and much of the politics and the confusion and the conflict of the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years has been generational. Now, as I look back, it came as a surprise to me when I figured this out just recently. I was influenced by a comment that Marshall McLuhan made once. He said he only knew what he was thinking when he heard himself say it and had someone react to it. It's called interactivity or interpersonal. I just have been led to look back at the 4 generations that I've experienced in this country in the last 50 years. I was born in 1920. I was actually conceived, counting back from my birth date, October 22nd. I was conceived on the very day that alcohol was made an illegal drug in this country. I don't know whether that was the assignment I was being given or what. So I grew up for the first 12 years of my life in which alcohol, booze, was the illegal drug, and they pushed nicotine smoking everywhere. You got, they were just giving out cigarettes, and the first time that I've been able to find references in cultural histories to the idea of a generation, there was no such concept of a generation to my mother. My mother grew up, I was the first generation of kids to grow up during the formative years, from 3 to 12, when your word processing system is being implanted. It's called the Chomsky window. When you're learning your native language at home, the language that's spoken, the techniques, reading or like that. I was the first generation that had, growing up, radio. I took it for granted, but I didn't realize what an absolute miracle this was. Go back to the cave 25,000 years ago and think, this was an enormous, it did create they called it the lost generation. And every one of these 4 generations that we've been experiencing in this country, since 1920s, has a mainstream culture that's going on, and then it's always a counterculture. And the counterculture is always defined by communication, musicians, writers, poets, entertainers, actors, and the 4 countercultures, each reacting to the mainstream culture at the time. This was not true of my mother. My mother danced the same waltzes that had been danced by her mother and her grandmother back to the early 18th century. The same old songs, When Irish Eyes Are Smiling, and like that. My mother had never, the only music she ever listened to was live music. The real excitement in my mother's father's life was they would go to New York once a year for a week, and they would see 7 plays, because that was the media. There was no television, there was no radio, there was no film. I can remember listening when I was a kid in real time to the voice of Hitler in Germany. Der Juden, heute Deutschland, morgen das Welt. Today we have very ready tomorrow the world, and my mother was trembling, and I remember Roosevelt declaring war, and Roosevelt getting elected saying we have nothing to fear but fear itself, which is a real New Age concept. But the point I'm making was that Roosevelt was the first politician to really understand, and he looked like he was running against Herbert Hoover, who didn't have a clue about this new thing, and because of this, I belong to the first really global generation. And many of the things that my generation brought, so it was the New Deal, we had a sense of concern for other countries. We went over there and fought Hitler to protect our allies and to protect the Jews. World War II was a very exciting humanist time, because I guess there was a draft, but everyone, able-bodied, man, I'm sorry, women weren't allowed, of course. I want to tell you this about my lifetime. Women could not vote in this country until 2 months before I was born. It was August 1920, I think the 20th Amendment was passed, which said the right to vote, in other words, to be a human being in this country, for a woman, now women could vote. Now my mother was a college-educated woman and a school teacher, and I can remember her excitement that finally she could vote. And I can remember there was an Irish Catholic Democrat named Al Smith who was running against Hoover in 1928, and I remember she took me down because she was a Negro music and this incredible jazz and rhythm and blues and all that. It was only when radio made that possible. And I remember when I was 12 years old, I'd be listening late at night. This voice would say, "Coming to you from the starlight roof of the Pennsylvania Hotel in glamorous Manhattan, New York, the music of Benny Goodman, or Count Basie, who was black, or Duke Ellington, who was black, and the Benny Goodman Quartet, for the first time brought black, of course, Negro then, but colored people and white people playing together, and black musicians like Teddy Wilson, and my mother simply didn't understand this. This offended, she just didn't understand, about swing and rhythm and blues, and my generation was the first generation to buy records. I remember it was Decca record, and for 25 cents you could spin these things. That was really, not to mention telephone. Telephone empowered the individual, because radio, of course, radio was still controlled by the networks and commercials, but television allowed the individual to communicate with another individual at real-time telepresence. It's really a virtual reality, limited, of course, to sound. And I didn't appreciate that, because it just came along, I just took it for granted, but that was an explosive creation of a new breed. It's also interesting that because of this connectivity the radio made possible, not only did racial discrimination become an issue, the New Deal, the concept of Social Security, the concept of taking care of other people, all these wonderful, but it was all done, of course, with groups, labor union groups. It was not individual, because except the telephone, there was no individual. And that's called the lost generation. And the counterculture then were the Hemingways and the jazz people, and Fitzgerald, and of course booze, and dancing, and bootleggers and speakeasies. You'll see that on our screen later to kind of bring back to you. There's always been an illegal drug, by the way, that the counterculture has used. It's like there's always a new music. My generation, and I think we were a noble generation, and I know that now my generation is seen as ritual, senile, farts that are using up 65% of the Medicare money because they're living longer and longer and longer. But it was a heroic generation, and I pay tribute to my generation because we ran into a terrible, terrible dinosaur wall of evolution. In the 1950s, a new medium came in, just as McLuhan predicted in 1950, television. Now, the first television was black and white, and the first television, you might not realize, was all live. There were no tape shows, and I didn't, basically I was almost, my mother was totally technophobic about, she would not have the television in the room. Only when I got to Harvard and had a little money, and I brought a television to a room. This was about 1962. The only reason I had a television, my wife and I, in our home, was because the kids, and the television was located in the kids' playroom. Now the significance of that, you see, I like to watch the World Series. I like to watch the conventions, because those are real things happening. But you see, most of the, but I didn't realize the two kids were in there watching, tuning on, turn like that, and those kids grew up to be the, the culture during the 50s was, of course, Eisenhower. It was run by McCarthy, and there was, after World War II, there, 1950s, there was affluence and Levittown, and suddenly everyone was getting their own house, and they were wiring houses, and people everyone having electric appliances, and but the counterculture at that time, of course, the beatniks, Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, and they were, the illegal drug now was no longer booze, because the New Deal had brought booze back. The illegal drugs now were marijuana, and it was jazz poetry, and it was also very interracial. And then this generation that grew up in the 60s, and it was only about 1965 when we got color television, and also a new orthodoxy developed. Actually, it was the 60s was very. The mainline culture then was, first it was Kennedy, but they killed Kennedy, and then you had Johnson, and then you had the war going on, and then you had CIA, and the counterculture, of course, was the hippies, called the Woodstock generation, and the illegal drugs here were LSD, psychedelics, and marijuana. And the music, of course, the music is always the function of music now. Since the 1920s, it was radio that brought my generation together. It was rock and roll that brought that generation together. And it's interesting and amusing to me that every generation thought they had broken through, put down the new generation. A lot of the people from the 50s, like Jack Kerouac, hated the hippies, and he hated rock and roll. He's pretty alcoholic, really, but as an example, that every generation doesn't like the music, which is unifying the next generation to come along. Nobody really understood the incredible power of rock and roll. Dylan was going around saying, I don't want to go through the whole thing, you're going to see it here. But the concept here is that we've now reached a period when almost every generation, like every 18 or 20 years, a new media comes along, and a new breed is created, and new music is created. It's happening right now with the so-called Techno Generation, 13th generation, and there's a tremendous conflict that the rock and rollers don't like rap and so forth. Now, when you think back, McLuhan said the media defines the reality we inhabit. 25,000 years ago, the media of communication was, of course, oral communication. And there's something wonderful about oral communication, where it's face-to-face. And the history of a tribe was passed on, not by books, not by written words, but by storytellers. And of course, each storyteller would embellish it a little bit or change it so that it was a living thing. The problem was, of course, that it existed only in our little tribe, and there really wasn't much novelty. You were still doing the same thing that your tribe was doing 100 years before. And then the next new media came along around the year 3000, when they started to learn to write on papyrus or bark, make little marks. The Phoenicians did it first, we think. The Chinese probably did too. But the first use of the written word was as a code to conceal what you were saying, that you could send it. And the Phoenician merchants would code and send to their salespeople who were selling dyes or whatever in Rome, how to cheat the Romans. But during the feudal period of handwriting, before Gutenberg, the only people that could read and write were a small group of hacker nerds called monks, who lived in the palaces of the Pope or the Duke. When they knew the machine language was Latin, and that was the Word of God, the illuminated manuscript. And of course, it took years and years and years to have a Bible which was illuminated, and that all the power was held by those who controlled media. And we're going to have a section here about stained glass windows and the power of the Catholic Church to control and program stuff like that. Gutenberg changed everything when he actually, interesting. The printing press came from the wine press, because you're always going to find drugs. You're always going to find brain-change drugs involved in all this sacrament. And when he invented this machine that allowed mass-produced media, so instead of illuminated manuscripts that took years and years and years and years and years, they could crank it out, that meant that the average person could have what the dukes and kings had before, a book, a portable book. And indeed, it was the German language was founded, and the Protestant religion was founded by a man named Martin Luther, who was translating the Bible from Latin so that the German people could understand it. And there were 19 dialects of German at that time, and he had to decide which of them, Prussian or Saxon or whatever like that, and he decided whatever he did. That created the nation state of Germany. Saxon did the same thing. There were dozens of dialects in England. That created the British language, which has been so powerful as a tool for that small, tiny little island. They could certainly fuck your head up with their words. And suddenly, God existed not in the stained glass temples and so forth. God was in a book, because it's the engineering age, the industrial age, and God was a great engineer, and it was that printed factory manufactured book that you'll find in any hotel room you go to. The true believing Christian Protestant still believes today that the Bible is the Word and a good book. So the point I'm making here is that there were no generations. There was probably, I had written down somewhere, there were 1,000 generations from the oral tradition where he sat around the cave. But even there, we were using the same methods of eyeball stuff, the fireplace and the shadows on the cave wall and the stories of how the tribe developed. It was 5,000 years before Phoenicians' handwriting and the great techniques of painting and addition and all that. And then there was about 3,000 years until you got 2,000 years until you got Gutenberg. And then the industrial age got to a point where around the turn of the century, quantum physics produced the new philosophy, the philosophy of the 21st, actually the 20th century. The challenge and the duty of the people that are interested in evolving in the 20th century was the humanization and popularization of quantum physics, around Einstein's relativity. Simply saying, you just can't see that. I'm changing, you're changing. We have to, feel. Nothing exists. Einstein said there are no absolute rules of laws of space and time. That blew the whole everything. Einstein, I can remember when Einstein was not allowed in this country because it was the Catholic Church. There was a guy named Bishop Sheen attacking Einstein, this Jewish guy that was coming over here claiming there was no absolute space and time. It was all relative. What do you mean? Nothing relative. God says Ten Commandments are not relative. The Ten Commandments are not a series of suggestions for your discussion group, children. I hope I'm not, looking back, I can see these historic moments in the evolution and the incredible adventure of the 20th century. And I think each of these 4 generations, we should all be awarded medals because we've been thrown out at the frontier. More has happened, and it's dizzying. And many of the conflicts that exist right now between generations, I think, could be, could be understood and even bring us closer together if we realize that we've all been going through confusion. And of course, as you're going to see, confusion and chaos is the name of the game anyway. That's quantum physics. They call quantum physics non-intuitive, meaning it doesn't make any common sense. But that doesn't make any common sense to Newtonian. Newton said there are laws of motion and mass and force and all that because that was the British Empire and that was capitalism, that was manufacturing, so there are these laws like that. And to run a factory civilization, you had to have people that are trained in schools. Schools are factories and classes, and you had to be trained, and you were going to be in. When I grew up, when I went to high school in my small little city, it was an absolute caste system. The really dumb kids, mainly Polish and so forth, went to trade school, and they learned trades. Then there was commerce, mainly for girls, but also for some men went that way. And then there was technical, where the smarter kids would go into engineering, for that. And then there was a classical high school, where those were going to go on to preach and teach and all that shit. But there was also cathedral, which was very strong at that time. But it's amazing looking back at the compartmentalization. It's almost like the Hindu caste system, the factory civilization. And the schools are like factories, and they look like factories, and in the 1980s, kids growing up in the 1980s, and this is the 4th generation you'll see shown here. We call it, I don't know, the high-tech generation, you can call it the digital generation, the first generation of human beings that grew up in, and again, see, it's totally age relevant. You're tied to the language that you learned and the media that you were exposed to when you were kids. Like, I didn't pay any attention to kids when they were doing television, and most parents of high school kids, they're now between 18 and 20, didn't realize what was going on when those kids were playing Nintendo or going down to the video arcade. So that was some little dumb game they were doing, but not at all. It's in media. It's they're learning how to move things around on screens, learning how to now the amount of brain power that we call RPM, revelations per minute, that can be in the cave. There are a few. One new idea a year might come along. Now the kid that has grown up in the 1980s has been exposed. In 1 week, is exposed to more realities than the wisest and most widely traveled people 100 years ago. And the awesome acceleration of RPM, revelations per minute. Newton's laws have been they haven't been repealed. They still work. I don't advise anyone to jump out of a 3rd-story window. Gravity does work at the material level. But basically, we now know that Einstein's laws are local ordinances that work for very slow-moving static situations. So the basic philosophies of quantum physics are chaos. It's all basically chaos, and uncertainty principle. Heisenberg said it's never you're experimenting on something. It's always an interaction between you, and that shocked the Newtonians because it was nothing. You couldn't be determinate. Well, welcome to the real world. The realities are clusters and patterns of light, probabilities, and all that. Now, this reason I went through this explanation is to warn you of what we're coming. We're going to try to put you into a state of mild daze, confused, unfocused. I want you to relax, and you don't need a seatbelt, and you will be overwhelmed at times. Things will go too fast for you, but just go with the flow. We haven't had any casualties so far. We advise you not to drive a car or use heavy equipment for about an hour after you see this. And we'll have a lot of time to talk about it, and I want your, we'll have a question and answer period. You're urged to think this is a question authority. I must say now I don't have any answers, but I look forward to interesting dialogue with you. Now let's put the, run the tape. I want to introduce now, this is Camilla Grace. Where's Joy? Joy? Oh, come on up, Joy. This is Joy Kabbalah, Chris Graves. They have a group called Retinal Logic. Now think about it. Psychologic is understanding the mind. Neurologic is understanding the brain. Retinal logic is a very powerful, because who controls your eyeballs really programs your brain. And these, they simply work with, they'll work, there's no work, but they play with this stuff 23 hours a day. And every time we show it, I've not seen this tape. We upgrade it, and you can buy a performance version of this tape, or I'm on it afterwards if you want to order it. And also afterwards for the questions and answers, Joy and Camilla and Chris will come up and answer any technical questions you have. This is all done in home equipment. Amiga toaster, kid stuff, $1 million. And again, we're not doing this to overwhelm you. We want to demonstrate to you how you can do this yourself. And your kids certainly will be, like it or not. Okay, ready? Smell it. I want to see that volume thing. Hey, Chris, I want to see that volume thing all the way up, huh? And, all right, lights out. The basic nature of the universe is extreme complexity, maximum diversity, continually changing, dissolving, reforming. Human brain has 100 billion neurons, a complexity that we can only be awed and confused by. Now we've all been taught in school, in church, that there is an order. There's an order that God has created. There's an order in society. Disorder is bad. Chaos is insanity. God's name in vain. Give me rules. Oh, that's good. Teach me numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is very good. A, B, C, D. Yeah. Hindus called it. Ramsar Singh said it. Everything changes. That which you call the Tao is not the Tao. Can't be good. Could not employ them or give them the opportunities their parents had. First generation of Americans to grow up knowing they could change the screen. high-tech kids, cynical about politics, and new music, a dozen new musics, house, rave, industrial, ambient, rap jazz. This new generation makes the hippies look like conformists. This program is being brought to you by your eyeballs. Your eyes are not retinal cameras. Your eyes are brain tissue, neurons, tentacles, open, hungry mouths feeding brains the food of brains, which is light. Who controls the light that hits your brain, programs your brain. Catholic love, light. We pause now to pay tribute to one of the first American philosophers of humanism, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He was thrown out of Harvard 130 years before I was, for exactly the same reason. He said divinity's within, don't go to the churches. The first American counterculture, Ralph Waldo Emerson, with the brains in Tokyo, Paris, small groups, interpersonal conversations, not separated, not divided. By verbal languages. Savage, brutal, sane, surgical, cruel practice. They victimize, right? That's 40% of young women growing up in Africa, Islamic countries. Word and meaning in the dictionary. Dyslexia, the dictionary is defined as a brain disease. People can't put like that together. And for several years now, if someone tells me they're dyslexic or they have a dyslexic kid, well, the dyslexic adult's kind of in trouble, but the dyslexic kid's got an advantage. In 10 years, they will define lexia, that is the skill, the ability to put words and clauses and phrases and sentences together in the proper way. what we consider addictive obsession to grammar and syntax. And they'll have AL groups, anonymous readers and writers. You got to kick the fucking habit. Because I'll tell you, it is addictive. I've written 36 books. I'm here like an AA person telling you, I want to write you each a confession. I apologize for the books that this dyslexia will be considered just like, oh, yeah. Before I repeat it, so I love to repeat it. The writers that have influenced me most in the 20th century. The 20th century, the art, counterculture art, advanced art, modern art. The 20th century is all expressionism, it's all expressing individual, and Dali, and Picasso. He was telling me, he'd look at words and they look like little swallows and like that. So James Joyce, as you probably know, was almost blind. And they even used cocaine to try to help him. All that did was make him write more words. He was taking English language and cutting it up because he'd look. See, when Joyce would look at letters, I mean, in one sentence from James Joyce, they'll have as many as 10 different puns in different languages. You know, most like that. You know, it's true. You can't spend too much time picking Finnegan's Wake, but it's just a real way of shaking you up about words. I heard he was Irish either. There's the Aldous Huxley, who was one of the top socialite novelists in England, left and came over here to Southern California with other people that were counterculture. And the counterculture then was they were studying Hinduism. He wrote a book of the Eternal Philosophy and Vedanta and the Christopher Isherwood and some top British intellectuals, all of whom, by the way, were regularly using psychedelic drugs. And you know, Huxley wrote the book Doors of Perception, Heaven and Hell, and his last novel, Island, all about this subject. Of course, for hundreds of years, it took me a long time to figure this out. What if I use the mic? No? Yes, okay.
Every other word.
Every other word. All Western psychologists. There's not one line in Western psychology that ever spoke about altered states of perception as anything except hallucinations and dangerous symptoms of schizophrenia or something worse. And they were calling these sacred plants psychomimetic. They were mimic psychosis. And, it was just one of those great acts of synchronicity that happens if you're ready for it. You have to be ready. And I looked in a Boston paper and realized that Aldous Huxley just arrived at MIT to be it was MIT 61, that was his 50th anniversary of MIT, and he was going to be a visiting professor for a year, and I called him immediately, and I was trembling, you know, he's a great guy, and I said to him, explained we were doing this research, and we're getting all this psilocybin and LSD from Sandus and this and that, and let me get this straight, you chaps over there at Harvard have all these psychedelic drugs, and you want to do research on it? I said, yes, sir. He said, what's your address? I'll be there in 5 minutes. And he was, and he came and guided us, and the first thing he told us was to take off the white coats, the boys and girls, and this is not a medical procedure, and it must be done in a small, totally Socratic, in small groups, people who share the same ambitions, and it should be in a setting which is aesthetic and which is ennobling, and the set, that is the reason you're doing it, the preparation should be, on, so that, then later, when I was in Switzerland, I was bailed when the American government threw me in jail because I was a fugitive. It was the Hesse family, and it was Albert Hoffman from Sandus Laboratory who invented LSD, who got me out of prison and got me accepted in little asylum for in Switzerland. And I learned then that when Hoffman had that famous bicycle ride 50 years ago, he accidentally took too much LSD, and he had to drive his bicycle home, and it took him 10,000 years to get across town. See, we're led to believe that he didn't know what he was doing, but he belonged to a group of scholars in Asiatic, and they would go to Persia, and there was a guy named Rudolf Gelpe, and there was several German, Hermann Hesse himself, fled Germany during World War I because he was a war protester. There's a long tradition of counterculture academics in Europe that we never knew about. Of course we never knew about it, because our history books aren't going to fucking tell us what's really going on over there. And you take a dictionary of 1960 and you won't find anything there would even suggest that this tradition has been passed on for thousands of years. And as they say, Coleridge went over, and there was Wordsworth and who wrote in Xanadu to Kubla Khan? Coleridge, you know. The point I'm making here is that we discovered at Harvard that, number one, we kind of stumbled into a magnificent tradition here. And they wanted it to be elitist, and they expected you had to be like an academic gentleman to do this. And a time thing? Really? Oh, no shit. 10 minutes? Oh, gee. Well, I'm going to stop talking to you. The point I'm making is that in the first years of our research, Harvard realized that there was no words, and we had to develop a language. And as I said earlier before, we started what was called psychedelic light shows, and now, the Grateful Dead have been doing it for years, but this is and now we have the equipment. It's inexpensive. Nintendo with CD attachments, we can actually see. This is done by we get toasted that almost any kid, certainly any schoolroom can do this. So that now there's when you think about it, I'm almost mystical thinking about destiny. Nature didn't make a mistake. When nature, over the years, evolved chimpanzees like us with these enormous brains, 100 billion neurons, they're not supposed to be wasted, and you can consider human history up until about the last 30 years, or at least a century, as being just clumsy mechanical preparation. We had to go through the industrial age, we had to go through books like adolescence. I think literacy is like acne for an adolescent or teenager, something you have to go through it. We still have to have machines, and we will always have to do that, but the notion that a human being should be like a machine, and that a good human being is prompt, reliable, dependable, predictable, like that, you see, that's no longer necessary, because the brain is designed to design realities. I must have offended someone, or there must be some... Come on, someone say something.
What do you think about all these new brain movies?
The brain smart drugs? I don't have anything to do with them. Number one, I'm too smart for my own good. That's a joke. And being a smart ass has gotten me in trouble enough. And also, I don't believe in legal drugs. When the government really comes down on them, the very fact that they're allowed out there now means that the government, yeah. By the way, I'm not putting down people that are doing wonderful work in smart drugs. The human brain, again, has over 100 receptor sites, and we've only found the vegetable compounds for about 60 of them. And it's no accident that over the last billion or million or whatever years, vegetable queendom has been developing all these wonderful, incredible plants which contain in their seeds exactly what human brains need. And just like bees need honey, wherever marijuana has been available, people would use it. And of course, the first thing you do when you get a bunch of marijuana, you take the seeds and throw them away, right? Right. The perfection of that synchronicity and that symbiosis between the vegetables and the animals, so that when I said about smart drugs, I don't want to put down those wonderful people who are doing research. We need a lot more research not funded by the government. The idea of a government-funded LSD program gives me the creeps. It's like, that matters, the whole thing about government health care. Get your fucking rubber gloves off my body, Doc. I love Hillary Clinton and all that. I understand she has to get reelected, and I'm all for that. But anyway, yeah. Why are you rubbing your hand and things like that? You unbearable? You can't stop it? Huh? Can't you stop it? Should I do it? Huh? Yeah. Yeah. Use the mic.
But I was wondering what are your thoughts about this theory of kids born after the 60s being reincarnation souls of the kids who died during the protests during the Vietnam War and the protests on this side of the continent.
The kids that have come up in the new generation are the reincarnations of the kids that were killed in Vietnam. Yeah. Yeah. See, that's one of those wonderful inventive creations, and I sort of go for it. Write a book about it. You know, it's. We need.
I was just wondering if you thought if it was a possibility or if it was sort of bluntly bullshit.
Well, no, there's no such thing as bullshit. No idea. The idea of reincarnation, I'm not an Orthodox Shirley MacLainite. No, there's a lot of, I believe in pre-incarnation. I want to pre-incarnate, and I want to, every one of these concepts that's lasted, as incarnation came to us from, reincarnation came from India and Hindu, and there's something good there. Don't listen to that. On the other hand, the astrological stuff is very important because for hundreds of thousands of years, the most intelligent counterculture people have used it as a language, and and the 12 signs are 12 obviously personality types. As an old psychologist, I'm interested. No, go for it. Write about it. Write a roll song about it. Yeah. Okay. There you go. Now, I tell you what you do. Yeah. I've been on about 10 records, recently. The new albums are out there on a lot of them. So if you get this, call me and I'll do the lyrics for it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. What about the boxers that have sort of like a Walkman, and you have put sunglasses on and they flash LEDs and play sounds in your ears? Are they too boringly legal for your tastes, or what are your thoughts on them?
Yeah. Again, we're talking about those brain-mind machines, and I think most of them just put you in a kind of pleasant trance. And I was in Tokyo about a month ago, and for the first time I saw, oh shit, you get in a trance, get some marijuana and put on the Beatles records, and time's about up. I got the flag here. One more question, okay?
How come you got in trouble with the member back then and Halpert and so forth?
That's a very interesting question. How come I got in trouble? Nixon called me the most dangerous man alive. How come? Well, I think you can't just lump the different people that didn't get arrested. Number one, Kesey did time. Allen Ginsberg has always been almost holy man. Who would ever think of it? Although he's been threatened with arrest. Richard Alpert comes from a it was impossible for him to get arrested. It really is. There were others that were arrested. I was not the only one. I was the most outspoken. And See, I had been doing, Alan and Richard Alpert, Kesey came at this as artists or as poets, that sort of thing. I've always been interested in the Socratic operating your mind. And all my heroes have always got precarious, the profession I openly practice of corrupting the minds of youth is a dangerous one. No pay, and it can be risky to your health. Galileo and Bruno, they microwaved him at the stake, you know, and so that I've always been fascinated. And I've always kind of assumed that unless your philosophy is shaking up the establishment, hey, somehow you're not doing what you're supposed to do, you get the message out. And when Nixon called me the most dangerous man alive, of course I know he's a liar. Nobody believes him. I would rather have that than the Nobel Prize. I know that sounds funny, but because to get the Nobel Prize, it takes a million little decisions along the way to play the politics and doing this and that if I even end up having the FBI and the CIA and Interpol and everyone chasing me around the world as a dangerous criminal. when I'm totally nonviolent. Never had a gun, although I was a sharpshooter at West Point and all that. But I mean, I don't know. Well, why do you think that they? What's your theory?
Why do I think?
That they went after me.
I don't know. I was a TV host for the I don't know. I just thought you were dangerous at the time. I missed all.
Oh, we all missed that. Listen, I want to say I truly believe that those people that grew up in the 60s, and, you know, the so-called baby boomers, hippies, and 30 people before that, it's very hard for you to understand what's going to happen in the next 20 years unless you know how to digitize. And I'm not condemning you 35-year-olds and 40-year-olds to eternal damnation. All you have to do is go to the 15-year-old kid next door and sit down and hang around, or find some kid that's a Macintosh addict and learn how to do home editing, home operating systems. And the kids, you know, they love to teach older people. I want to tell you, it's all changed. Everything I learn now, I learned from people under the age of 30.
So, have you, you know, Bob Dilts, you know those guys?
Robert Dilts, I know him very well.
Bob Dilts has done this, I understand, on computers already.
Yeah.
Also.
Neuro-linguistic programming, right?
Well, he uses that to do some kind of computer program.
Yeah.
And then in Canada, he sort of, he puts on a seminar with the same title, which is doing this different.
He's referring to people that in the so-called neuro-linguistic programming, and Bandler, and I've done a lot of seminars with Bob Dilts, and we have a tremendous mutual respect. In many ways, this is where you anchor back in time, you know, your early imprints and all that. In many ways, he's saying exactly the same thing as I say. We're good friends. We don't make enough money to do these together anymore, but I never met Bandler, but Dilts...
One time,
are leaders in the software industry, so-called, right now, for example, Bill Gates was an asset dealer at Harvard. Steve Jobs, who invented Apple, went to India as an asset head and spent a year wandering around, and finally came up with an incredible conclusion that Thomas Edison did more for the human race than any of these gurus, which he went and started Apple Computer. And that's a really wonderfully powerful, I'm not sure you even appreciated how wonderfully accurate that was, but yeah, it's not either psychedelics, and a lot of us are disappointed that we're not being arrested right now for this, but I guess, thank you very much.